the Trump administration wasn't already openly defying the Supreme Court, it appears to be now, with Donald Trump now openly admitting in an interview with ABC News that he could bring Kilmar Abrego Garcia back from El Salvador, but won't. And that, of course, despite the Supreme Court ruling weeks ago that the White House must facilitate the man's return after they deported him, even though a judge previously ruled that he couldn't be sent back to El Salvador because he faced a credible fear of persecution. But with that, where I'll actually start this whole thing is with Joe Rogan of all people. And that because actually before being asked about Abrego Garcia, Trump was asked about these recent comments that Rogan made on the subject of due process.
The other side is making a very legitimate argument about the right to due process if you get processed and shipped out of the country and put in a prison in El Salvador. I think due process exists for a reason, and the reason is it is horrific for someone to be accused of something they didn't do, be imprisoned for crimes they didn't commit, and then live in a cell. It is the foundation of freedom. Like, we have to make sure that these people are actually guilty, otherwise we become monsters.
And in the interview yesterday, you actually had Terry Moran quoting parts of this segment back to Trump and asking,
is Joe Rogan right?
Oh, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, we want to be careful, and we are careful.
But then Trump, going on to defend his immigration policy, blame the Biden administration, and repeat his unsupported claim that Venezuelan jails are being emptied into the U.S., with us then seeing the interviewer steering the conversation toward the issue of Abrego Garcia, which, of course, is a topic that seemingly flies in the face of Trump's claim that he agrees with Rogan about due process or that his administration is being careful. Right, so just to lay out all the facts, it is true that Abrego Garcia entered the U.S. illegally in 2012. And in 2019, he was arrested, with that also being the year that the judge said he could not be deported to El Salvador. And notably, during his deportation proceedings, the government presented what it said was evidence of his membership in the gang known as MS-13, with one judge later saying the so-called evidence against Abrego Garcia consisted of nothing more than his Chicago Bulls hat and hoodie and a vague, uncorroborated allegation from a confidential informant claiming that he belonged to MS-13's Western clique in New York, a place he's never lived. And with that, Trump has also argued that Abrego Garcia's tattooed hands are evidence of his gang ties, a claim that he actually repeated in the interview. But notably there, one, the MS-13 supposedly tattooed on his knuckles, that's actually been digitally added on top of the original photo. Right, something that many saw as being added to the photo to kind of translate what they said that the other tattoos actually represented. And two, right, those other tattoos, the ones that do actually appear to be real, experts have actually questioned whether they are truly MS-13 symbols, and in general, they say tattoos aren't a reliable indicator of gang membership. And so with all that, a big key thing is that Abrego Garcia has never actually been charged with or convicted of being a member of a gang. Also then, separate from that, we've seen Trump naming Abrego Garcia as a wife beater, highlighting a civil protective order filed by his wife back in 2021 in which she describes being hit by her husband. There, she ultimately decided not to pursue the order and has since said she only filed the order out of caution after surviving a previous relationship with domestic violence. But of course, whatever the case may be, as Rogan kind of said, the whole point of due process is if you're gonna put someone in jail, whether for being in a gang or hitting your wife, you have to prove it. But as many have argued, this isn't about defending the specific man, it's about defending people's rights. And that's also a point that the interviewer made, which ultimately led to Trump conceding that he was leaving Abrego Garcia in El Salvador by choice.
This is not an innocent, wonderful gentleman from Maryland.
I'm not saying he's a good guy. It's about the rule of law. The order from the Supreme Court stands, sir.
He came into our country illegally.
You could get him back. There's a phone on this desk.
I could.
You could pick it up, and with all the power of the presidency, you could call up the president of El Salvador and say, send him back right now.
And if he were the gentleman that you say he is, I would do that.
But the court has ordered
not.
you to facilitate that.
I'm not the one making this decision. We have lawyers that don't want to do this.
But the buck stops in this office.
No. I follow the law. You want me to follow the law? If I were the president that just wanted to do anything, I'd probably keep him right where he is.
Supreme Court says what the law is.
And so, Trump's words there seemingly contradict comments by administration officials who said they lacked the authority to get Abrego Garcia back, and saying that they'd be complying with the Supreme Court's order by simply letting him back into the United States if he were ever to make it here somehow. Though this is notably Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem has also just said that if he were brought back to the United States of America, they would just immediately deport him again. Though, kind of at odds with that, you also have the New York Times reporting that the Trump administration sent a diplomatic note to officials in El Salvador to ask about releasing Abrego Garcia, and that they said no. Though this is notably, according to the Times, quote, it remained unclear whether the diplomatic effort was a genuine bid by the White House to address the plight of the immigrant. And with that, some legal experts suggested that it could just be giving the appearance of complying with the Supreme Court ruling, with one notably saying the note might have satisfied the Supreme Court's demands, but adding, as usual, the president is his own worst enemy in court. And adding, when you have the president publicly saying there are things he can do but is choosing not to do, I think any federal judge or Supreme Court justice worth their salt may eventually order him to do those things. Saying, I think if the president had just kept his mouth shut, the government's case would have been a lot stronger. Hey, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this clip from the full Philip DeFranco show. And also, a big thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring our Clips channel. Turn your passion into profit over at squarespace.com/Phil or use the QR code. Because whether you're launching a business or a lucrative side hustle, your website is your digital business card. It's the only space where you control the story, no algorithms or distractions. And with Squarespace, it's so easy because they got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple, no coding required. So get started for free at squarespace.com/Phil or scan the QR code on screen and use code Phil for 10% off when ready to launch. Squarespace.com/Phil.